Welcome back. A very good evening to each and every one of you who are joining us right here from Stein Studios in Ratmalana. Our guests this evening are Iran Vikram Ratna, Deputy Minister of Investment Promotion and Highways, Mr. Shilal Laktilaka, attorney at law, and also Dr. Dayan Jaytilaka, senior celebrated diplomat of the previous regime and now a political analyst. I have a question for Mr. Laktilaka. We'll start off with that question and you can rebut and bring in new arguments during your 3 minutes of speech now. My question to you is, Mr. Laktilaka, Dr. Dayan Jaytilaka said there was no transparency in terms of bringing forth the 19th Amendment and quipped a cabinet minister. He said that there was a constitutional conspiracy. Agreed? Disagreed?
I'm partially agreeing and partially disagreeing. I would like to say like this. If there is any transparency problem, still at the second reading, you can remove all these things. I agree because from the Gazette itself, even when you look at the last document which was circulated within the Parliament by the Attorney General and Legal Draftsman Department, there are several new clauses introduced after Section 45 as well as 46. Now, for instance, Section 45, after 45, tenure of office of the Prime Minister has been reinserted. This was never considered in the Supreme Court. And new clause has been inserted. I don't know why and how, but it is not a problem, because my argument is you can introduce several documents, but at the second reading stage, committee stage, MPs can delete, insert or do whatever they like. But in respect of the present context, my argument is transparency and respect. This is a consensual government. In consensual government, we have to respect each other. It's not a power political game. This is a win-win situation, what we are calling the present context. So therefore, consensual politics need consensual democracy. Without that, we cannot continue this. So that is my answer for that. By saying so, now, if you look at the 19th Amendment, I am puzzled with Dr. Dayan Jaytilaka when he was saying, quoting my good friend Professor Kumar David. Now, to me, 19th Amendment, if you look at the executive powers, there is no substantial changes to the executive power. Executive powers are intact. Therefore, from the point of Dr. Dayan Jaytilaka, I am puzzled because he is an ardent supporter of our executive system. So therefore, I don't see any changes other than few clauses change in the chapter 8 of the Constitution. The executive power of the President is almost intact. That is due to the Supreme Court decision. So therefore, I don't know on what basis Doctor is talking against the 19th. He has to support this. We have to oppose. That is the situation.
Dr. Dayan Jaytilaka, your time is up now, 3 minutes, but I want to get an approach for the question for you to answer. Puzzled because you are an ardent supporter of the executive presidency. Are you really?
Well, I am. I find that of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, 4 have executive presidencies despite their diversity. US, France, Russia, China, all except Great Britain. All of Latin America has executive presidencies. Many countries in Southeast Asia have executive presidencies. I agree with President Jayawardena, who canvassed the view from 1966 that for economic development, you need a strong and stable executive free from the whims and fancies of the legislature. That's what he said. Now, I do think that after 35 years, you've got a fat and top-heavy executive presidency, which needed liposuction. And I think that the restoration of the independent commissions, strengthened, reinforced, and the reimposition of term limits would have done the job. But what you have now, in answer to Shiral, is a situation, even in the latest draft, in which in several matters the President has to act on the advice of the Prime Minister. Now you have the Executive President elected by a majority of the citizens of the island taken as a single unit, and therefore a far more representative repository of popular sovereignty than the Prime Minister.
Dr.
who is
Jan
elected
Jazak, I just
from
want to interrupt you
far
for a
smaller
second.
base.
I just want to interrupt you for a second there. The clause which says advice and consultation has been removed from the amended 19th Constitution.
No, Shamim.
If you are making reference
that's the omnibus clause.
No.
The omnibus clause.
it has been removed. This is the
last
new
week
one
it
which
was
was
circulated
given
with
to
a
the
case.
parliamentarians on the
But on the
22nd
appointment
at 8
Shiral,
p.m.
on the appointment of the cabinet,
That was on the 19th. The sketchers, the Kothuroti amendment, as you said before. That was on the 19th.
So, with
It was
regard to the
22nd.
appointment of cabinet ministers, that has been deleted.
That has been deleted.
Well, that's
that
good
one has
news.
been
That's
deleted.
good news.
That
So,
comes his support for the
I have to correct that because the general public are watching, and I have to intervene and correct you there.
no,
Dr.
that's fine.
Jacques.
I mean, that's good news if that has been rectified. But the fact that that was there until a few days ago tells us that the intention was quite sinister. And then, of course, I have the problem about the Constitutional Council. It's a kind of a black box. The President is not a member. The President is permitted to nominate one. The Prime Minister is a member, though. And most of the Constitutional Council are supposed to reflect the plurality of Sri Lanka. They need not be elected members. I hope that's going to be rectified too. And this Constitutional Council is the one that has control over the quote-unquote independent commissions. So I still have a problem, and I continue to agree with Professor Kumar David, that you are setting up two elected leaders, the President of the Parliament, with the potential for deadlock.
Dr. Dayan Jayatillaka, of course, Deputy Minister Eran Wickramaratne, fulfill the promises and go for a quick election. Does the United National Party have a competitive advantage?
Yes, it does. And I'll come to that quickly. But what I wanted to say was this. There are countries with executive presidential systems and have good governance. There are countries with executive presidential systems and have bad governance. There are countries with cabinet systems which have good governance, and there are countries with cabinet systems which have bad governance. So the problem often is not just the system. We, unfortunately, our experience with the executive presidential system since 1978 hasn't been a very positive experience overall. That is why when presidential candidates in the past presented themselves to seek the office, they often said, we will abolish it once we receive the office, because they knew what the public were thinking about the executive presidential system. That has happened to President Chandrika Kumaratunga. She promised to abolish it. Then subsequently President Mahinda Rajapaksa promised it, couldn't abolish it. So I think I agree with the point that good governance can be under many different systems. The issue here is about basically the excessive powers of the executive presidency, and that's what the 19th Amendment seeks to trim. Now, the thing about power sharing, the executive sharing its power, that principle is accepted within certain limits by the Supreme Court. However, what it specifically struck down was the Prime Minister becoming the head of the cabinet, and the number of ministers being determined by the Prime Minister, changing subjects by the Prime Minister, then him determining the subjects, him being able to change those subjects at any time. These kinds of things that were envisaged that maybe the Prime Minister could do them, all this has been struck. But it has retained two provisions. In Article 43(2), it provides that the President shall, on the advice of the Prime Minister, appoint from among members of Parliament ministers to be in charge, and so forth and so on. But its appointment is done by the President. The appointment is done by the President. In Article 33A, President shall, except in the case of the appointment of the Prime Minister as required by the Constitution, also act on the advice of the Prime Minister. So it specifically, in Supreme Court struck down specifically, some powers that the Prime Minister was giving. But the Supreme Court has recognized the principle that executive power and the checks and balances could be in place. Many countries which have executive powerful systems have checks and balances reposed in Parliament, in the Prime Minister, in the Cabinet. Those systems are there. This is not a new concept. I don't have the fear that Professor Kumar David has or Dr. Jayatilaka has. I think we need the checks and balances in this system. We've suffered under a very powerful executive presidency, and the time has come now to make the change.
May I ask you three quick questions? One, when you said years ago the United National Party took the stand that the presidential system should be abolished. I don't remember that. I remember last year a paper, the UNP paper, which said there were three options: retention, reform or abolition. That was just last year.
No.
That's the first question. The second is, why did the Supreme Court actually have to strike these down? Why were they included? Thirdly, wouldn't you have had checks and balances if you just brought back the independent commissions and term limits? Wouldn't that have done the job?
Deputy Minister?
The answer to the first question is the United National Party created the executive presidency. Virtually every other party in this country opposed the executive presidency right from the beginning. They wanted a change. It's a United National Party who actually created the executive presidency, promoted the executive presidency, that took 3 decades to come to the conclusion that maybe the executive presidency was not serving the country in the best interest of the country. And therefore, at a United National Party annual session, resolution was moved to basically do away with the executive presidency. You're right that there was another paper. This resolution was moved some time ago. But you're right that there was a paper. There was a paper
this was
of
in the year
discussion.
1999.
99 originally, we moved to abolishing the executive presidency. But there was a paper, sir, you're correct, and that what you said is correct. To discuss those 3 possibilities, yes, there was a paper. Going to your second question, which was...
Why did the Supreme Court...
Very quickly, Deputy Minister,
the Supreme
you
Court...
have to give
why
time
were
to
they
the
there
Deputy
to
Minister
start
to answer the question.
Sorry.
Yeah, the Supreme Court struck it down because in the Supreme Court had to make a determination whether the executive president, who is directly elected by the people, he has certain responsibilities towards the people by the fact of his election, that whether these provisions actually impinged on that responsibility that he had. And the Supreme Court made the determination that it actually impinged. And therefore we respect the decision of the Supreme Court. And we respect it, and we will do everything in adherence with the decision of the Supreme Court. Would the third question, would the checks and balances that were there provided through the independent commissions, would they have been sufficient? I don't think that they would have been sufficient. I'll give you just one example. One example is that in the present constitution, the president, after 1 year of parliament, could dissolve parliament if he so desired to do so. In the 19th amendment, that power has been restricted, so that parliament could be dissolved only in the last 6 months of the parliamentary term. I think it's a very, very important that they reduce the discretionary power of the president, because it has led to corruption in the past, particularly in getting members of the opposition at various times to cross over to government by giving them political office. That discussion has now been reduced.
Ms. Laktilaka, do you agree?
You didn't answer one of my questions. Why
Dr. Jayatilaka, let's move on to that question in a minute. Yes, Ms. Laktilaka.
Instead of this technical argument for and against the presidential system, what I would like to say, now if you look at the history, 1960s when J.R. Jayawardena was introducing this presidential system to then UNP, he did this on the basis of economic stability. Now most of the people who are talking about for presidential system, they are bringing economic stability and national security as the foremost requirements to that. But the world experience negates that argument. Now if you look at Israel, who is fighting with the Arab world, it has a prime ministerial system. Then if you look at Singapore is a prime ministerial system. I am not for Westminster model, but I just want to show the hollowness of this whole argument.
No, Shiral, I'm sorry, I can't agree there. Israel is finding it difficult to arrive at peace because the Prime Minister is a captive of smaller parties in that system.
Mr. Laktarekar, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, so likewise, now what we want is to find a proper system for Sri Lanka, which is a mixture of executive and legislature.
We will be right back after
this is a
this.
mixed-up system,
We will
not a
be right
mixer.
back after this short commercial break. Interesting thoughts by Dr. Jayant Jayatilaka saying executive presidency is needed. This is witnessed in 4 countries at the UN Security Council. Mr. Ran Wickramaratne says good governance should also be coupled with the executive presidential system. I leave it to the people to decide. We're going for a short commercial break. We will be right back. This is Face the Nation.